I'd like to thank Karen for inviting me and also for rejigging the schedule for me. I was asked to talk about NAFNAC's new website, which is called Travel Health Pro. It's not that new anymore, but I think there's a lot on there, and it'd be quite useful to sort of just showcase some of the things on the website in the context of vaccine queries that we get to our travel health advice line. So what I'd like to do is just set the scene a bit about NAFNAC for those of you who don't know who we are, and then really just sort of think about the website in the context of you can't know everything. The important thing is knowing where to go to in relation to travel health and how to access information quickly and efficiently. And then what I'm going to do is look at some of the queries that we've had, about 3 or 4 queries that we get regularly on our advice line, and just try and signpost where you might look for those answers to some of the questions that we get asked, specifically in relation to vaccines, travel vaccines. Obviously, it's a much broader issue than just vaccines, but specifically about vaccines. And then finally, just how to keep up to date. Travel medicine is dynamic, so how you keep up to date with what's happening and how to sort of make sure that you get the relevant alerts that are going on. So NAFNAC was set up in 2002 by the Department of Health with the broad remit of protecting the health of the British traveller, and there are several ways that DH wanted us to do this. First of all, develop national guidance, carry out surveillance of international hazards, infectious and non-infectious, administer yellow fever centres in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, look at public health messaging around travel health, and work with industry in particular, travel industry in particular, and the Foreign Office in terms of sort of providing guidance to those groups, education and training, and then set research priorities in terms of travel health. We're now commissioned by Public Health England, but we sit within UCLH. Some of our team actually are also employed by Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And our new website you can access through our microsite, and what you'll see is that we offer a number of services. We've got the website, we have the Yellow Fever programme, we have the Health Professional Advice Line. I don't know if many of you have used it, but it's run by specialist travel health nurses. We're going to develop a whole portfolio around training in travel health through an online service, but that's due to be launched later this year. And we try and sort of keep people up to date with what's going on globally from a travel health perspective. And that's the team. We've changed a bit. It looks like there's a lot of us, but most of us, bar 2 people, are part-time workers. And some of you may be familiar with our nurses who manage our travel health advice line. So we've collected a lot of data over the years from our from our health line, our advice line, around what health professionals find difficult when they're advising travellers, and we've looked at about 10 years worth of data, which is around 50,000 calls, almost 100,000 calls actually, to our advice line. And what people find difficult are dealing with travellers who have multiple destinations, those that are going for long periods of time, travellers who are immunosuppressed, where there might be potential interactions between vaccines or between malaria prophylaxis and medication people are on, pregnant travellers, and those that have multiple conditions or comorbidities. So we analysed 5 years worth of data a few years ago, and you can see from this graph, I don't know how clear it is, but the vaccine-related queries are the most common that we get to our advice line, followed by malaria queries. And when you look at the vaccine queries, it's really around people that have coexisting health issues or pre-existing health problems, or a special risk travellers, so pregnant women, young children, the elderly. So those are when people have problems. People don't tend to have much problems around the country recommendations or certificate requirements, and they don't have much concern around product information. And again, when you look at the groups that people query in terms of health needs, it's the pregnancy, the immunocompromised, children and the older traveller. And then finally, when you look at the vaccine, quite understandably, the main thing that people have concerns around are yellow fever vaccine, and the others really don't take up as much of our time on the advice line. So we looked at the last 3 months of the sorts of queries that we were getting to our advice line. So that was looking at around 5,000 calls. And it really is, the calls, when it's vaccine related, is really around yellow fever, and more recently it's been around polio, and I'll explain why. Some of you probably already know. And then again, it's around the elderly traveller, pregnant women, children, those with comorbidities, immunosuppressed, and those that are visiting friends and relatives in their country of origin who now live in the UK. And then in terms of the type of travel people do, it's a longer term traveller and those that are going to multiple destinations that create some confusion for people. So when we developed our old website, and I know many people like the old website, it was very old and very clunky and very hard to maintain. So when we were looking at developing the new website, one of the things we wanted to do was actually run some focus groups with both the traveller and health professionals who were advising travellers to try and get some understanding of what they wanted out of a website. So we did quite a bit of work before actually developing ideas around the new website. And what was really interesting was that we used to originally have two sections to our website for those that knew the website. We had one section for health professionals and one section for travellers, but actually in essence the information was the same in both. Some of the wording was slightly different in the traveller group. And one of the things that came across quite clearly from both groups was they wanted one site, because people got confused about which site they were accessing when they used the old site. They felt that the site was too text heavy, the old site was too text heavy, and they found the terminology that was being used confusing. And the things that came across were they wanted more interactivity and some sort of summary of what the detail was trying to explain. That's not all that they said, but that's some of it. So eventually we launched something called Travel Health Pro after a lot of work, and there still are some issues with it, particularly in terms of people not being familiar. People are used to what they're used to, and changing to a new site is very difficult to navigate, but that's the new website. And the things that I want to point out about the new website are that the bit that's accessed most frequently is the country information pages, and I'll discuss those in a detail in a minute. The latest news section, so where we have latest news, that's where you go to find out what is happening, what we think is important for travellers or health professionals to know when they're advising travellers. And as you'll see on the front page, we have a lot of the latest news articles on the front page as well. The outbreak surveillance database is something that people aren't very familiar with, and one of our teams scans for outbreaks that are of relevance to UK travellers worldwide. They scan for these outbreaks daily, and then we will post them on our outbreak surveillance. And it might be helpful if you are advising a traveller where you're not quite sure about whether you should be giving them a vaccine or not, to look at the outbreak surveillance database, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. The diseases in brief section is just really trying to provide a summary, in particular for the vaccine-related diseases, giving you access to the SPC or the vaccine schedule, which you can access through the country pages. The fact sheets are basically more detail around a number of either infectious diseases or travel health-related conditions. And the world overview is a new section that our developers wanted to create for us, which is just basically you can look at a map of the world and see what outbreaks are occurring throughout the world, which I'll show you very briefly as well. And as I've already mentioned, we do post important messages on our front page. We have a tag cloud, so you can see what's popular on our website. So you can see that things around public health, emergency of international concerns, very important. Malaria is trending quite a bit at the moment. Zika virus, obviously, it's not as trending quite as much as it was. And there are things that are always interesting for people, which is the food and water hygiene as well. And then the other thing we've produced is a guide to how to use our website, which you can access, and that which I'll show you in a minute. And then you can subscribe for updates, so you don't need to go to our site to find out what's going on. We'll push out information to you if you subscribe to our updates. We'll send out news alerts to you. And this is just a quick overview of the fact sheet we've produced to give you an idea of how to make best use of the country pages on the website. So I talked about the latest news items. So as you can see, we will post on things that we think are important for people to know, but it's in the context of UK travellers. It's not in the context of post-travel. And recently we obviously posted an item on dengue in Uruguay, because it's the first case of locally acquired dengue that was reported, and we felt it was important for that to be known. So the outbreak surveillance is an interesting area, and you can look on the outbreak surveillance by just clicking on the outbreak surveillance tab. And this, we will update this daily, and as it will show that yesterday we updated on various outbreaks that had been reported. Now we will only report on verified reports. We won't report on media reports because we can't verify them. We'll only put things on our outbreak surveillance if we know that either the State Department or another country's public health agency has confirmed that the outbreak has occurred. And a good example is a Zika virus in Cuba. We heard media reports of the Zika virus in Cuba a week ago, but we didn't report it until the Cuban Health Ministry reported it. And you can look at the detail of the outbreak. So where it says state read more, it takes you to the link to where the original source of the information was from. That's in Spanish, but you can translate that. And the world overview is really, it's just really to give you a visual picture of what's happening worldwide, and that is pinning all the outbreaks that we've reported on in the last, that's actually the last month, and also the news items that we've reported on. And what you'll see is there's a lot going on in South America, and that's all Zika virus related. But you can click on the icons. For example, if you clicked on the one in Ghana, it talks about a meningitis outbreak. It doesn't actually say what type of meningitis it was, but that was reported in Ghana in February. So fact sheets, I think we've redesigned our fact sheets. The content is the same, but we have a number of different areas, and a particularly important area to look at is the clinic resources section, where we'll have things like how to do a risk assessment for Zika virus, how to fill in a polio vaccination certificate. So there's really interesting things there, so it's good to explore that. And one of the other things we have on there is the rationale behind all our recommendations. So on our country pages, we will give guidelines regarding vaccinations for certain vaccine-preventable diseases, travel-related diseases, and we've tried to give rationale and our thinking behind why we're providing that information. And often it's based on the literature, what we know about the epidemiology, what we know about cases in return travellers, and sometimes it has to be a consensus decision made with generally Public Health England topic experts. So thinking about the scenarios, this is quite typical of the sorts of cases we get to our advice line. This is about Nick and Elaine, who are both going to Luanda in Angola for 3 years for his work. They've got 2 children aged 3 months and one aged 4 months. They're fit and well, the baby's breastfed, and that's quite typical of the sort of query that we'll get. So the first thing you would do, and you all know this, is go to the Angola page on our website, but there's some quite interesting things on our page that maybe some of you will be aware of. One of the things we have is we actually have direct links to Google Maps. So if it was somewhere else in Angola, you'd be able to click on that and get into the Google Maps and actually look in detail at where that person was going, which is very helpful. And that was one of the things that was fed back to us from the health professionals. We also have information on temperatures, which sometimes is helpful when you're looking at perhaps insect-borne diseases as well. And we have a resource at the bottom, which is just general fact sheets that you should know about, general things that are relevant to any traveller. And this is just an example of our food and water-borne hygiene fact sheet. So when you go into the vaccine recommendation section of the country page, you'll see that we've sectioned it into what every traveller should have, which is basically be up to date with your UK schedule, and we link to the Green Book and the National Immunisation Schedule. Then we have a section on what certificate requirements there might be, and as you'll see, there's a certificate requirement for yellow fever if you're over 1. And then we'll have a section for most travellers. These are vaccinations that we recommend most travellers consider having if they're not immune. And then some travellers, it will be based on what they might be doing when they travel there. And if you click on the yellow fever section, what you'll get is information on who it would be recommended for, and actually a map of where yellow fever occurs or where we would recommend vaccination in Africa. We do have some more detailed information for certain countries, but for Angola it affects the whole country, so we're not concerned about providing a country-specific map. You can click on something like rabies as well, and we'll give you information on when rabies vaccination might be indicated. And then you can click on the rabies in brief section here sometimes just to have a quick access to what the schedule might be and who it might be indicated for, what the contraindications might be. So Angola, so we'll forget about the malaria and the other risk sections, but actually one of the things you might want to do with Angola for this family is look at the important news section, and as you can see, In the important news section, there's been a report of measles. We've linked to an article on measles worldwide, and that was partly related to measles outbreaks occurring worldwide last year. But if you look at the outbreak section, which is probably more important, so that's the measles news item, what you'll see is there's been an ongoing outbreak of yellow fever occurring actually in Luanda itself. So that actually would be of relevance when you're thinking about particularly that baby who's 3 months old and is too young to be vaccinated against yellow fever. And if you click on that the yellow tab here on yellow fever, it will give you the whole timeline of the outbreaks that have occurred that we've reported on, and it will tell you where the outbreaks are occurring. As I said, they will only be verified reports that we report on. So, and then because yellow fever is quite an important one, you can do a general search in the general section of the website to look at anything to do with yellow fever, and our search engine is actually quite good on the website, and it will give you loads of information on anything you want to know about yellow fever. We have a fact sheet on yellow fever, and more recently, I don't know if any of you have managed to access this, one of our nurses, or two of our nurses, put together a podcast on how to fill in a yellow fever certificate and the international health regulations, because again, we were getting lots of queries around this. I don't know if the technology will work, but I'll see if we can try and get it to work. You can hear a bit of the podcast. No, it didn't work, never mind. So that second case is Tarek, who's a diabetic who is going to perform the Hajj. And again, as before, you would go to the country page, but what might be of relevance in the Hajj is very different to what might be of relevance for people going to Angola. And again, there's a whole lot of information around requirements that might be required if you're going to perform religious ceremonies, so the Hajj or the Umrah, and that will be on our front page on the country recommendations. And then, of course, if you look at the outbreaks and the news items, one of the things that is of relevance if you're going to Saudi Arabia is the whole issue of MERS-CoV. And one of the recommendations around MERS-CoV is that people with comorbidities don't travel to the Hajj or perform the Hajj. And we have a fact sheet that is specifically related to the Hajj, which we update annually and update on the guidance from the Ministry of Health. And that does include things like they will specifically state their vaccination requirements for individuals travelling. And what I should say about the fact sheets, they'll all have references and resources that you might want to use, so you can link out to really important areas where you can get extra information. They all have reference sections as well. The third case is Mark, who's going to Brazil for work, and he's HIV positive, and there's a bit more information about him there. So the Brazil page, again, will give you information, and as you'll see, there is a risk of yellow fever, which again is the relevant thing in his case, well, amongst other things. It's got recommendations and of what most travellers should consider having in terms of vaccinations, and then what you might consider depending on what the individual's doing. We have a Brazil-specific map, as you can see, and it will show you where we recommend vaccination. I should say these maps are provided to us by the CDC. And then, obviously, if you looked at the outbreaks in Brazil, you'll see that it's everything related to Zika virus at the moment on there. But what we do also have is some fact sheets on preparing travellers who are living with HIV and AIDS, and some resources that you might want to look at, including links to Terence Higgins Trust, where things like insurance might be important, looking at the global database on HIV-specific travel restrictions, which might be relevant, and then some specific references that might help as well. And we obviously link to the BEVA guidelines as well. So this one's not yellow fever related. So Asma is going to Karachi in Pakistan for a family wedding. She's going for 6 weeks and she's 24 weeks pregnant. And what you see again, there's a whole section around certificate requirements, but it's not around the yellow fever. Although there's stuff around yellow fever, it's the polio issue that's the issue for Pakistan. And actually, the issue for Pakistan is that probably 2 years ago now, WHO declared a public health emergency of international concern because Pakistan was exporting polio to Afghanistan particularly, and what they wanted to do is try and stop the spread of polio. So they put in some stringent recommendations around vaccination requirements and certificate requirements, which actually do have an impact for UK travellers that might be going there. And in this particular case, because she's pregnant, even though she might be up to date with UK schedule, we would vaccinate her in the UK with an inactivated vaccine to prevent her from being vaccinated if she was to leave Pakistan and be offered the oral polio vaccine. And then we've got a fact sheet on pregnancy, and then this was produced by our nurses again because they were getting lots of calls at the time WHO announced the emergency. People didn't really understand how to fill in vaccination certificates for polio, so we've done a quick sort of FAQ on that. We're almost getting to the end of the travellers. So Richard and Jill, couple going for a Caribbean cruise. Neither have travelled outside of, I think you're laughing because you know what the issue is going to be. Neither have travelled outside of Europe. So you think a Caribbean cruise, you know, why is it relevant? Should it be worried? But of course, whenever you're thinking about cruises, which we get a lot of calls around, you've got to look at the itinerary, and it's not just the Caribbean, it's also South America, Trinidad and Brazil, and both of those places there may be yellow fever recommendations or requirements. And there's the map that shows you that. And again, going back to, you might want to look at the yellow fever guidelines, and in particular we're concerned if these two do need vaccination, they're in a group that you might want to be cautious about giving vaccination to. So I hope I've sort of given you a brief overview of the website and how you might use it. I think the important thing to say is that actually it's just worth looking at it if you've got time. I know everyone's really busy. It's just looking at it because there's lots of things that you will find. I've just gone through a few of the main things. But I hope I've covered the sort of issues that in general about people find difficult. Some of the things you might want to think about, multiple destinations, what you might want to, resources you might want to look at in terms of immunosuppressed travellers, pregnancy and multiple conditions. We do have a telephone advice line, so please do call us if you have got any queries with these groups of travellers. And the other way to keep up to date with us as well is we do have a Twitter feed, and we do have a Facebook page as well, where we try and keep important information on there as well. And finally, before I end, if you are interested in travel medicine and it's something you want to do further, some of you may or may not know that there's an international conference happening in London, the North European Conference of Travel Medicine. That's in the beginning of June. That we've got a whole range of international speakers coming to talk at it, and it will be very interesting if people want to attend. Thank you.